So let me now introduce our keynote speaker, Marcia Pally. She's a professor at New York University. She's also a guest professor at Humboldt. She just published this year a book entitled Commonwealth and Covenant, Economics, Politics, and Theologies of Relationality. And she also published a few years ago a book on the new evangelicals. So the German translation of the book was published in 2010, and the English translation the English version in 2011. So today she will talk about the 2016 presidential campaign and America's civil religion.
Thank you very much, and thanks to all of the people who helped bring me here today, Professor Shida, the American Embassy, and of course Amandine Bab, who organized this conference very beautifully. Frau Bab began by talking about certain religious groups like evangelicals and also about people who are not in religious groups like the unaffiliated. So I would like to begin by saying that people with strong religious beliefs in the United States and people who do not have strong religious beliefs vote in part because of religious beliefs that they may have, but also significantly because they are Americans. So their religious beliefs interact synergistically with their American beliefs. And that explains a great deal of the way Americans understand politics and the way they vote. So I'm going to talk today about Americans' civil religion, the beliefs that Americans have qua Americans, which informs the vote and the understanding of politics and the worldview of Americans across the religious spectrum. So, as I understand my job here today, it's to explain the US election, meaning that it's, somehow it seems today to you to be not understandable. So, and I've been invited in previous years to other institutions in Europe, more or less with the same mandate, to explain what the heck is going on over there, meaning it must not be understandable what's going on over there. So I'm very flattered that you think something over there should be understandable. A presumption of rationality somewhat at odds with the American historical record. Actually, it's at odds with all historical records because people are not motivated to act, as you know, politically or in any other way, primarily by reason. We know from longue durée observation, and we know it from the brain sciences, that rational considerations make up only a small part of individual or group behavior, which is in fact the outcome of unconsidered, internalized, automatized habits, norms, belief systems, and so on. So this brings me to my first point. What's going on over there in the US presidential election is the same not understandable thing that always goes on. In short, this election is not exceptional. It's as American as apple pie. In fact, one could say it's a matter of Americans' civil religion, or slightly more accurately, America's civil religion is part of the worldview undergirding the actions taken in the present election. Understanding the undergirding worldview will help us understand present political activity. Is that working? Yes. First coined by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, civil religion describes the beliefs, values, aims, and understanding of the world that make political, social, and economic behavior what it is. In the American context, sociologist Robert Bellah identified several biblical archetypes of the American civil religion: the Exodus, chosen people, promised land, New Jerusalem, and most importantly, sacrificial death and rebirth. These are worked, Bellah said, into a civil religion that is genuinely American. American civil religion is concerned, quote, that America be a society as perfectly in accord with the will of God as men can make it and a light unto all nations. In the paper that follows, I will expand on America's civil religion, looking first at the first article of faith, fervor, and second, its commitment to sacrificial death and rebirth, commitment to rejection of the old and embrace of the new, and third, the application of the civil religion to present electoral campaigns. First, fervor. Problems, because they are already with us, tend to be concrete and measurable. But solutions, because they project into the future, are a matter of belief. Americans, heir to people so devout they crossed an ocean to stay true to their principles, have faith in what will save the day. This is not Brussels bureaucracy or muddling through with Merkel and now May. In America, people talk about the economy when it comes to describing problems. When it comes to solutions, beliefs count. The problems facing voters today, many voters today, is that they are being squeezed out of a globalized, technology-driven, high-skill, powered economy, and the culture accompanying that economy. Now, before we tell a doomsday scenario, first, the good news. The US economy has, in fact, steadily improved since 2009, partially because it couldn't get any worse. Employment is down to 5%, hourly wages have risen, especially for low-income earners. 3.5 million people have risen above the poverty line in the last year, much of the gain going to blacks and Hispanics. That's the biggest drop in poverty since 1999. In September, the number of people working increased by 440,000, meaning people who had left the market because of the recession are returning to jobs. The annual median household is up to $56,500. That's up 5.2%, the largest rise since 1967. Health insurance coverage continues to rise. The New York Times reported Americans last year, in 2015-16, reaped the largest economic gains in nearly a generation. The long-term national debt has fallen to half in 2000, of estimates of what was projected in 2009. The bad news. On the other hand, improvement is not distributed equally, and many Americans feel sidelined or fear that they or their children will soon be sidelined as the jobs they are familiar with ebb away and horizons dim. As Thomas Hobbes wrote, the fear of loss is a powerful motivator. Loss of material or emotional well-being, loss of a sense that one understands how the world works or has some control over one's life. The Wall Street Journal analyzed it this way, quote, Trump rides a blue-collar wave. 55% of his supporters are white working class. The Journal of the Week came to a similar analysis. Politics That Works gives it to you in 4 charts about the education, high school, age, older, income, working class, and race, white, of Trump supporters. The Federalist, CNN, and public policy polling come to similar conclusions. Yet, Trump voters also include those in the middle classes, who too are experiencing economic squeeze, as middle-class purchasing power has stayed flat since the 1980s, while cost of education, healthcare, and much else has risen. Importantly, today the US has less upward mobility than Canada and Europe. In terms of Western nations, we are among the most unequal, with our Gini index, our inequality index, in line with Russia, Chile, India, Indonesia, and Kazakhstan. The top 20% of households in the United States owns over 84% of the wealth. The bottom 40%, 0.3% of the wealth. In sum, Both working and middle classes are motivated by the present economic squeeze and by the fear of continuing decline, continuing loss of control, and continuing sense of powerlessness. But you will notice that stagnant wages, rising cost, fear of dim futures are also the focus of Republicans such as Ted Cruz or John Kasich, and for Sanders and Clinton as well. What distinguishes voters and captures their allegiance is not our economic sins, but our beliefs about the path to salvation. In America, salvation involves, again, what Robert Bellah calls sacrificial death and rebirth, not only starting anew, but rejecting the old, without which one cannot start the new. And this is the second article of faith of America's civil religion. Cast out the corrupt. We hear it in the echoes of the preacher's "Rid ye of the devil," and in traces in the parallel political call to throw the bastards out. This election year, throw the bastards out is clearest in Trump's campaign, but emerges as well in Democratic positions. Populist demands grow loud when the bastards are identified as Washington insiders, constrainers of liberty, corrupt and incompetent. Nativist demands increase when the bastards are identified as immigrants or other suspect groups. In both the populist and nativist forms, a troubled world will be set right when the evil forces are cast out of the body politic. Let's talk about the populist form. When Obama was elected, opponents branded him both a fascist and a communist. Now, it's not easy to be both at once, but Americans fear the same thing in both: government control. Whoever persuades the nation that he or she will keep government small and individual opportunity large wins the country. Americans across the continent, class, religion, and race respect individualist, hard-working, future-oriented self-responsibility. They respect local voluntary associations, as Tocqueville called them, voluntary associations that get things done without help from outsiders, and they disdained freeloaders who rely on the government. Good things have come of this: an anti-authoritarianism critical of inherited privilege and status quo ways of thinking, a healthy democratic critique of government, a willingness, even propensity, to engage and develop new ideas and new life forms separate from past and neighbors, and a self-reliant sense of responsibility. But it has also brought some negative aspects: unreflective hostility to government programs and to those immigrants, African Americans, whom white Americans fear do not share the sense of self-reliance and self-responsibility. We can think of it this way. Government in America is what religion is in Western Europe: suspect. Europeans constrain religion so that it may not impose its benighted, tyrannical power on the state, which is assumed to be secular, rational, and democratic. Americans constrain the state so that it may not impose its tyrannical will on democratic society, the people themselves. America, in the minds of most Americans, is not the government, it's we, the people. When facing problems, Germans say, the governments should throw the bastards out. In America, they say, throw the bastards in government out. Whatever you think of this, Americans have come by this honestly, or at least historically. First, we were born in a revolution against central government, but long before, the earliest settlers of the 17th century were fleeing the centralization power play between Parliament and Charles I, in hopes of keeping their local traditions and local political control. They were very wary of London. The settlers departed England, historian T.H. Breen writes, determined to maintain their local attachments against outside interference, and to a large extent, the congregational churches and self-contained towns of Massachusetts stood as visible evidence of the founders' decisions to preserve in America what had been threatened in the mother country. In the struggle between London and rural area autonomy continued in the United States. Second, in addition to this general suspicion of government, was the dissenters' antipathy towards the state. The many early settlers who were religious dissenters were doubly suspicious of government. First, for its centralization efforts, and second, for the persecution that central government or its official churches had foisted upon religious minorities. All told, Americans were a group self-selected for keeping central government out of the New Jerusalem, a key symbol of our civil religion. Third, the rough nature of settlement and continuing frontier living. The frontier was active until the beginning of the 20th century. This rough nature of settlement further encouraged individualist and local self-reliance, and the view that government wasn't good for much, since there wasn't much government around to rely on. The role of government, of course, grew as the country grew, but individual initiative and local community were long the keys of survival and of building the future. This is imprinted in the American civil religion. Fourth, Protestantism, also born in revolution against Rome, also prodded resistance to central authority. The mandate to read the Bible for oneself and to find one's own inner path to God, the priesthood not of priests, but of all believers, encouraged fervent self-responsibility and unease with authorities, both ecclesial and political. The first great religious awakening of the 1730s and 40s, and the second from 1820 to 1850s, were festivals of individual iconoclasm with breakaway religious groups, populist religious ideas, promoted by untrained but impassioned entrepreneurial preachers. The churches in America were not part of an elite state system, but part of the people, not a top-down hierarchy, but the voice of the individual and local community. Reformed Protestantism, come to America through the Puritan and other Calvinist traditions, had a formative influence on American political development. Reformed Protestantism emphasized that the sovereignty of the nation does not start with central government, but with local covenanted communities, the foedus, which form networks to constitute the nation. It's these ideas of networks of covenanted communities gave the United States its federal, from foedus, its federal system of government, and its robust civil society, and its continuing suspicion of central government. During the American Revolution, Americans' anti-authoritarian churches sided with the revolutionaries, not with London, and the more anti-authoritarian, among the more anti-authoritarian was Arminianism, which in America became Methodism. The Arminian-influenced churches shifted the accent from God's grace to the individual's role in his or her own salvation. Accept Jesus and you are saved. The critical step is yours. A theology that is both self-reliant and democratic. As John Wesley, who with his brother Charles Wesley popularized Methodism in the United States, wrote, "He, God, will not save us unless we save ourselves." Methodism was a faith well suited to a do-it-yourself nation, and America embraced it. The number of Methodist churches in 1770 was 20. By 1860, it was 19,883. Anti-authoritarianism was so popular in America and so ordinary in American churches that by the mid-19th century, two Kentucky preachers in good anti-authoritarian conscience could opine, quote, "We are not personally acquainted with the writings of John Calvin, neither do we care." From this history came the myth, the reality, and the value of local self-responsibility and individual self-reliance. The other side of the coin, suspicion of central government. We learned that government is incompetent from the centuries of frontier settlement, where there was little government to rely on. We learned that government takes away freedoms and rights from the centralization efforts of London elites, from the oppression of state churches and British colonial rule. This doesn't mean early Americans were only strong individualists. On the contrary, local town and church controlled a great deal of life. But control was in the hands of the locals, whom one usually chose for local political councils or local church committees. Conformity pressures within towns was very high, and nonconformists were urged to leave. But that's the point. People left to choose new localities and the customs, religions, social beliefs, and economic propensities that suited them. And they continued leaving, most moving west across the continent. Americans are not only individualists, they are voluntary associationists, Tocqueville again, big group joiners, as long as they choose the group. When they move, they rejoin other groups. It's the corrupt authorities in government telling them what to do that they don't like. To sum up so far, in America's civil religion, reliance on government authorities is for the faint and faithless of heart. Self-reliance is the Lord's Prayer. The good times come to those who rid themselves of the devil in political discourse, to those who throw the bastards out, and most of all the bastards in government. When Ronald Reagan in 1981 said, quote, "Government is not the solution to our problem, government is the problem," he was channeling America's history and passion. So was Obama in 2008. He too campaigned on change. You may remember this. It was his big slogan in 2008. As part of civil religion, the belief that good times come to those who throw the bastard out transcends political party. Obama's message of change, get rid of the old, bring in the new, was ironically absolutely traditional. Change in America is traditional. But rid ye of the devil, throw the bastards out, mean that America doesn't know what to do with its government. Once you get a government and it's no longer new and change, then it's the government in power which you want to throw out. This is writ large in the presidential election, but it's always writ large in American politics. We can see that central government has to do a few things, but it should otherwise be constrained. I'm going to, give two examples, one from healthcare. First from healthcare. During the 2009 to 2010 debates on Obamacare, there was a speaker on a national public radio program, a pastor, declared that it was our moral responsibility to improve the health care for the needy. Of course it's our moral responsibility, but the government is the last guy you want doing it. They do it badly, he said, and they limit individual choice, which is worse. Over half the American public agrees, reasoning as follows. The government bailout in 2009 restored profits to the banks, but not jobs to the labor market, or not enough jobs, or not jobs with a decent wage. You see, the government is incompetent. Why let it run your health care? A second argument, a second example of suspicion of government is the high rate of gun ownership and the passionate gun rights movement. The debate is not about hunting rifles or guns purchased for self-protection, as no legislation seeks to remove these options. Rather, the purpose of gun ownership is, and I quote, to protect against the tyranny of our own government, close quote, from a lawyer from the National Rifle Association and an article in the 2009 Harvard Law Journal. In a February 2009 speech to the Conservative Political Action Conference, the vice president of the National Rifle Association, Wayne LaPierre, said, Our founding fathers understood that the guys with the guns make the rules, close quote. Noted conservative political commentator George Will identified the underlying beliefs in the gun rights movement as follows. Free individuals must be independent of coercion, and such independence depends in part on freedom for the menage of standing armies and the government monopoly on the means of force, close quote. As the Obama administration expanded government's role through Obamacare and through his economic aid programs to cope with the financial crisis after 2008, fear of government also expanded. Gun sales rose. In 2008, George W. Bush's last year in office, gun sales were between 600,000 and 700,000 per year. In the months after Obama's election, sales rose to 1.1 million, and after leveling off, rose steadily each year of his presidency with an average of 1.1 to 1.2 million guns sold per year, and those are the ones we know about. Let me now throw the bastards out to the present election. I'll look at the hot campaign issues of jobs, immigration, transnational trade agreements, refugees, and Trump's bad boy behavior. Americans across the political spectrum who are angry today have legitimate complaints of economic squeeze, decreasing opportunities, decreasing upward mobility, and the fear that it will get worse. Those are the problems. Some, older and white, see the complexion of the country growing browner. They feel that with this demographic shift, the value of hard-working, risk-taking, self-reliance is fading. Let me stress that. It's not the desire to be pampered, but the values of hard work, commitment, and self-reliance that people fear are being replaced by, on one hand, government handouts to those who aren't working, and two, by an economic system that is no longer responsive to their own hard work. Arlie Hochschild, in her recent book, Strangers in Their Own Land, sketches this line of thinking. She said about the predominantly white throw the bastards out vote, imagine that you are waiting patiently in line for the American dream. People of color are behind you, and in principle you wish them well, but you've waited long and you've worked hard. And look, people are cutting ahead of you in line. Some are black, others are immigrants and refugees who get sympathy and money for the listless and lazy from the government. Government run by who? A biracial son of a low-income single mother. You see, the president and his wife are cutting ahead of you in line. This and the liberal media mocks you, says you're a racist and homophobic. Everywhere you look, you feel betrayed. The paradox to this line of thinking is that Americans who have this line of thinking fail to see that immigrants have precisely the values of hardworking, disciplined self-reliance, which is why they self-select to come to America and why they succeed becoming part of America's economic growth. In 2016, the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, with research from 14 economists and demographers, both those who favor immigration and those who are wary of it, reported that 1. Immigration has little to no negative effect on overall wages and employment of native-born American workers. 2. High-skilled immigrants have a significant positive effect on Americans with skills and on the working class because they spur innovation and help to create jobs. 3. American teenagers without high school degrees, high school dropouts, saw their hours of work reduced by immigrants, true, but not their ability to find jobs. And 4, the first generation of immigrants generally costs the government, usually in the cost of education as their children go to American schools. In the first generation, costs to the government are estimated at $57 billion. But in the second generation, immigrants add about $30 billion to the tax pool, and in the third generation, about $223 billion a year to government finances. In sum, the report found immigrants to be, quote, an integral to the nation's economic growth, close quote. In sum, native-born Americans have justifiable economic complaints, yet they do not stem from immigration, as the nativist populism says, but rather from technological change, improved productivity, and the way global trade is regulated. But even global trade is a complex issue. For example, while the US lost 1 million jobs to China between 2000 and 2007, job loss then stopped. There's no economic evidence, at least, that NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, yielded similar jobs losses. The Congressional Research Service concluded in 2015 that the net overall effect of NAFTA on the US economy seems to have been relatively modest. The US Chamber of Commerce reports that the re-establishment of trade tariffs, as Donald Trump suggests, in the best case scenario, would strip at least 3.5 million jobs. Economists Peter Petrie and Michael Plummer of the very prestigious Peterson Institute estimate that the Trans-Pacific Partnership would raise American incomes by $131 billion. Annual income gains by 2030 for the world, they estimate, would be at $492 billion. Wages are predicted to rise. It will cause job churn. That means people changing jobs for about 57,000 positions, but 55 million people change jobs in the United States annually anyway. I'd like to look at the case study of Pittsburgh when we're talking about job change and trade. The city lost 44% of its iron and steel manufacturing and has become an object lesson in Trump's anti-trade position. But Pittsburgh's decrease in iron and steel actually started at the end of World War II, not since NAFTA, owing to increased competition in markets outside the US and owing to improved technology, higher productivity, and mini mills where production is accomplished with fewer workers. No number of steel mills in Pittsburgh will decrease Chinese competition in selling steel to Latin America or Europe. This is the case for all US manufacturing jobs. They constituted 38% of all US jobs at their peak at World War II and have been declining ever since, owing to productivity and competition from overseas. Yet, in the American context, breaking large international trade agreements designed by whom? The Washington insiders, feels like throwing the bastards out. Loss of jobs in the United States might be addressed, for a start, by improvements in education, regulations of corporations to require contribution to worker retraining, substantial private and public investment in regional redevelopment, regulations to prevent US firms from moving headquarters abroad to avoid paying taxes. These were the steps taken in Pittsburgh. It lost 5,100 iron and steel jobs, but those losses were outstripped by the regional redevelopment in Pittsburgh of new industries, leading to a gain of 66,000 jobs in healthcare, banking, and professional services. If you don't like the ideas that I have just suggested about addressing things like job loss, there will be better ones. But the crucial point is this: solutions that will, on economic grounds, address America's economic problems are not being seen by significant sectors of the US population because solutions to problems are a matter of belief. Americans could demand these economic programs that I've suggested, or better ones, but this would likely mean increased government action or cooperation between federal government, local government, and industry. And that's at odds with our civil religion. Hochschild calls this the great paradox: distrust of the federal government by people and regions who need it. As one of her interviewees in her book explained, government spends tax money on people who lazed around at days and partied at night, close quote. Another interviewee whose home collapsed in an industrial accident because of inadequate regulation of industry nonetheless opposes government regulation of industry. Why? Because big government threatens community. This sentiment is not new. In April 2009, in the depths of the economic crisis caused by the 2008 crash, caused by private hijinks on Wall Street, 55% of Americans thought the problem was big government, not big business. Only 32% were concerned about the role of big business. Last year, 55% of Americans said ordinary Americans would do a better job of solving our problems than government. So when politicians like Donald Trump say that the problem is big government, it sounds right. It clicks. Throw the bastards out. In April 2016, the Public Religion Research Institute reported that, quote, 2/3 of Trump supporters think the nation needs a leader who breaks the rules. Throw the bastards out. This goes some way towards explaining the attraction of Trump's bad boy behavior. His racist and misogynist remarks and behavior, his fanning the flames of anti-Semitism, add to his attraction because they are a slap épaté les bourgeois of the politically correct, educated elites whom Trump voters feel run the economy against them and who condescend to them. They give a kick in the pants to government legislation on anti-discrimination, letting those line cutters cut in front of you, and is a slap in the face against politically correct talk. Throw the bastards out and their prissy laws protecting the line cutters. What about refugees? In 2016, 13,000 Syrian refugees entered the United States. A total of 110,000 refugees entered from all over, have been authorized for 2017. 110,000 for 2017, including an increase of several thousand Syrians. Hillary Clinton would admit 65,000 Syrians. Refugees undergo the most rigorous two-year vetting process of anyone applying to stay in the United States, including searches in counterterrorism databases at the FBI, Federal Defense, and Homeland Security agencies. Syrians have an extra level of security check. The system is not and cannot be perfect, but given the difficulty of getting through the vetting system, terrorists are far more likely to enter the US through other means like tourism. It's thus not clear that barring Muslim refugees will actually increase security in the United States. But it does do ISIS's PR for them, giving weight to the claim that the US is in a war against all Muslims, who thus must retaliate against America. Yet, keeping or throwing the immigrants and the refugees out, throw the bastards out in nativist form, has wide appeal. It's rid ye of the devil, expanded from the Satan of big government to other spoilers of the city on the hill, another key image of America's civil religion. There are many reasons for antipathy towards Muslims and other immigrant groups, and surveys have correlated support for Trump with pre-existing racial and ethnic intolerance. But intolerance becomes deportation, throw them out. And border closing, keep them out. Only where throw the devil out is seen as the way to save a fallen world. One definition of tragedy is voting for policies that won't address your problems. Trump promises to solve America's ills by throwing out The bastards in Washington, they had trade agreements, immigrants, and refugees. Additionally, he promises to cut taxes for the super rich and to dismantle Obamacare, which has provided health insurance for over 20 million people who previously didn't have it. The wealthy who vote for Trump are making a self-interested but coherent choice. They are voting for someone they believe will lower their taxes so they can keep more money for themselves. But Trump's base, the millions who are squeezed and anxious citizens who are voting to throw the bastards out, are making a tragic choice, for Trump's promises will not likely address their problems and disappointments. The Conservative Tax Foundation estimates that his tax plan will raise the debt from $2.6 trillion to $3.9 trillion in 10 years, even with the effects of the job growth that he promises. He does buy steel made in China for his construction projects in the United States. Moody's estimated a job loss of 3.5 million jobs from Trump's tax and trade policies. Yet, his jeremiad of brimstone and hellfire for Washington gives voice not only to American discontent, but to the belief that it will be solved by throwing the bastards out. The more unflinchingly he preaches, the more he's in sync with the national creed. Over the summer, before the sexual assault tapes among white voters without a college degree, Trump led over Clinton 57-31. To these and to others, Trump's rage at government feels right, like a Boston party redux. When he says, "I'll fix it," his supporters hear that he, an outsider, will fix the bastards in Washington. What they don't hear is that when he becomes president, he will be the bastard in Washington. He will be the government, the prime paradox of American politics. Other Republican candidates had small government proposals, but they lacked Trump's feathers and war paint yelp. Ted Cruz came closest, which is why he was second in line and why he is already running for 2020. You might want to know in America, why aren't the rich thrown out? That's a European question. On the whole, the rich are not resented in America. They are considered self-responsible, inventive risk takers, and they are admired. There is some concern about very large corporations. 56% of Americans say large corporations have a negative impact on the country. But this is because they are seen as unfair fat cats, not as hardworking, self-reliant risk takers, but as fat cats basking in established wealth in a handshake with government to keep the hardworking, self-reliant little guy out of the rewards of her labor. By contrast, 82% of Americans see small business as having positive effect in America. Enter Trump, rich, successful, bold, and though he inherited a few millions from his father, he is seen as willing to take risks, to build, and most of all, to stick it to the insiders and throw the bastards in Washington out. What about Clinton and the year-long surge for Bernie Sanders? They're preaching America's alternate gospel. Government should give the little guy a leg up, a boost towards getting on your feet. Government is not a problem to be rid of or kept small as possible, but government is a source of help so people can get going on their own. Summing up the distinction between Hillary Clinton and Trump, the New York Times wrote that we have, quote, Trump seizing on economic dislocation in mixing populist and anti-trade positions with traditional Republican tax cutting, while we have Mrs. Clinton being a strong government in creating jobs and driving up wages. In this civil religion, it's government's purpose, in the alternate civil religion, it's government's purpose not to shrink and to shrink regulations, but to be substantial enough to provide services and opportunities. Its loudest voice came in the first decades of the 20th century, when widespread labor abuses led many to feel that government should protect ordinary folk from greedy elites. Teddy Roosevelt, Republican, spearheaded the reformist legislation of the progressive era. His cousin Franklin Roosevelt, a Democrat, inaugurated the New Deal, both substantial increases in government to protect the common woman and man. This civil religion continued through the emergencies of the Depression, World War II, and the Cold War. In 1954, the Republican President Dwight Eisenhower wrote to his brother saying, quote, "Should any political party attempt to abolish Social Security, unemployment insurance, eliminate labor laws or farm programs, you would not hear of that party again in our political history. There is a tiny splinter group, of course, that believes you can do these things. Their number is negligible, and they are stupid." Close quote. The final hymn of our leg-up civil religion was Lyndon Johnson's civil rights program and Great Society programs, large government programs, to aid the needy and ensure African Americans of their political rights. But these were seen as government handouts to the undeserved lazy and black, and prodded a fierce anti-government backlash that, as Arlie Hochschild's documents, remains today. Then came the 60s counterculture, the hippies and the yippies, seen as more irresponsible self-indulgence, and large sectors of the nation clamored for a return to our traditional values of self-reliance and small governmentism. The mix of business interests and throw the bastards out small governmentism, which is the Republican coalition, business interests and small governmentism, makes sense in a country where most businesses are small, self-reliant, hardworking entrepreneurs. Business interests and self-reliance are not seen as opposed, but as hand in glove. The new right that emerged as a backlash to the 60s in the Republican Party joined together the financial center and right wing, to all those who valued self-reliant, including Christians, following their heritage of suspicion of federal government on religious grounds and on grounds of anti-authoritarian self-responsibility. And the third component of the new right was the working and middle classes, abandoned by the Democrats, who, like Republicans, did not embark on retraining and regional redevelopment as US firms moved to low-wage countries. Richard Nixon was the first to run on this new right Republican coalition, but Ronald Reagan, who was the real great communicator of this populist small government plus business mix. He preached a gospel of small government, and few noticed that after his first much publicized tax cuts, he substantially raised taxes 11 times for the rest of his presidential tenure. He preached the rewards of self-reliance, and few noticed that the self-reliant, hard-working middle class saw their incomes fall, and those of the poor fell drastically. Nonetheless, Reagan was re-elected in 1984 with a landslide, winning 60% of the vote and 225 out of 238 electoral votes, the highest ever received by a presidential candidate. When it comes to solutions, beliefs in small government and throwing the bastards out count in America. In conclusion, the economic tsunami of 2008 has added to problems has been accumulating since the 1980s. America is in a civil war, a civil religious war, about its response to these problems. Rid ye of the devil's government remains America's first and oldest civil religion. It faces the newer leg up civil religion. 72% of Democrats, 72% of Democrats and those leaning Democrat see a major role for the government in lifting people out of poverty. Only 36% of Republicans do. 82% of Democrats see government as having a major role in health care. Only 34% of Republicans do. The apostles of each civil religious faith, like the circuit rider preachers who traversed 19th century America, cross the country today with their campaign staffs, hoping to save the nation. In 1787, the majority of Americans did not want to sign the new Constitution, though the old one, the Articles of Confederation, was so weak that Washington couldn't govern and the government fell apart. What was the complaint against the new proposed Constitution? It would give government undue control over the populace. In 1787, Americans weren't sure what to do with government, and they are still not quite sure what to do with their government. Thank you for your attention.